And it gives me great pleasure to introduce David Mendoza, who is going to talk on a Pesach-themed subject, all about Rakusens and Palwins, and I'm really looking forward to this. So with that, I'll hand over to you, David, and thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And let me just try and get full screen. Great. And there we go. So obviously, before starting, I've just taken over the running of the Anglo-SIG, so I should recognize all the work that Doreen has done over the years. I think she actually set up the group. And if anybody has any suggestions of subjects they wish to hear, or speakers, or indeed if anyone wants to themselves make a presentation, then please let me or Lee or Gina or Daniel know. We'd be very grateful to hear from you. So I got thinking about what do we what is British Jewry? What is Anglo Jewry? If we look at it from ourselves, we live within a legal jurisdiction, and we watch the same TV programs as other people and so forth. But my question is what are things that are unique to us, that are not part of the larger British community, and that are not really known to Jews in other countries? And because Pesach is almost upon us, I picked these two items. Rakusens matzah, we have all eaten it, and possibly most of us continue to eat it. Palwins wine, I think we have all drunk it. Some of us continue to drink it. Probably most people have thoughts about it. And these products are, I think, part of our family history. It's not just part of Anglo-Jewish history. I mean, for example, I remember my grandfather always hiding the afikomen in the same place. And of course, everybody always making comments on the quality of Palwin wine. And perhaps that's the point to start. And before the meeting, I was trying to find examples of early opinions in Britain on kosher wine. And I found one, this is of course before Palwins arrived, from somebody who was in the Jewish community in the early 1800s. And this is none other than Benjamin Disraeli, later Prime Minister. And of kosher wine, he said, "It tastes not so much like wine, but more like what I expect to receive from my doctor as a remedy for a bad winter cough." And I think we have all heard the cough remedy comparison before, although probably not from Benjamin Disraeli. But what I think is interesting is I always assumed that the taste of kosher wine was the Russian taste in wine. That's to say, it was brought to Britain by mass immigration from Eastern Europe. If you've ever drunk Russian or Georgian wine, it is very thick and very sweet. But of course, Disraeli was around a couple of generations before mass immigration from Eastern Europe. So either it is a flavor that is intrinsic to kosher wine, or I suspect more likely this is how most wine used to taste in most of the world, and it's perhaps just the palate in Western Europe that has changed over the years. But I also found a Jewish restaurant critic who I think will be known to most people here, Jay Rayner. And he says, Palwin number 9, I think he means Palwin number 10, a red wine with the texture and flavor profile of cough medicine. So again, cough medicine, but none of the efficacy. Nobody drank it because they liked it. They drank it at Passover because ritual demanded that they should. And I have to admit guilt that I cannot imagine saying the blessings on anything other than Palwin, even though, to be honest, with the meal we will be drinking another wine. And I also looked up if any wine critic had ever commented on Palwin. And indeed, there is a Brit who made Aliyah, who moved to Israel and works in the wine industry there. And that is Adam Montefiore, who is actually a brother of the historian Simon Sebag Montefiore. And he says, later when I worked at Carmel obviously being the producer of Palwin, there were more queries, questions, and complaints about Palwin than all the other wines put together. For some British Jews, it was part of the religion itself. And I'm certainly one of those. It's, as I said, I cannot imagine Seder night without Palwin. But out of curiosity, I also looked up what non-Jewish people might think about Palwin, and I found this horrified comment on the Sainsbury's website from Nono, who says, "Quite the nastiest wine I've tasted ever. Sweet and rough and yuck. Never again," which I suspect is a sentiment shared by some here. And the good news is, if you're absolutely phobic about Palwin, there are places you can go where it is actually literally banned. And so this I found on the Iraqi Ministry of Trade website, and these are essentially Jewish businesses that they boycott. And amongst them is the Palestine Wine and Trading Co., because of course Palwin is an abbreviation for Palestine wine. And this is, of course, back when the Jews were the Palestinians and the Arabs were the Arabs. So if you're completely phobic about Palwins, you can sort of pack your bags and head off to Baghdad. So briefly, what is kosher wine? Well, I'm not so qualified, but very briefly, it is wine that has to be made by Sabbath observant Jews, people of Shomer Shabbat, and obviously can't have non-kosher additives or have non-kosher things used in the processing. And I think actually that we're much stricter today. I suspect that standards 100 years ago wouldn't meet our requirements today. And we should also mention mevushal wine. Essentially, this is wine that's been boiled, which of course includes Palwin number 10. And this means it can be handled by non-Jews, although obviously the boiling doesn't contribute much to the flavor of the wine. So here's the famous Carmel logo, and you can see in the middle the spies that were sent into the land of Canaan, returning with this enormous bunch of grapes. And I think it's worth observing that ancient Israel was an important wine producer. So, for example, in the Roman Empire, it was quite a large exporter around the whole Mediterranean basin. And of course, that was reduced with the uprisings against the Romans, and later, of course, the Arab conquest, because Muslims are not big fans of alcohol. It does seem, it's not proven, but it does seem that winemaking continued in Eretz Yisrael on a small scale for consumption by the local community, but it didn't really, wine production didn't really get going again until the 19th century. And that is largely down to these two people. On the left, we have Sir Moses Montefiore, who was the great Anglo-Jewish philanthropist who made a huge contribution to the Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael, what was then, of course, part of the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, and did a lot to get industry there going again. But more importantly, on the right, we have Baron Edmund de Rothschild, who was the head of the French branch of the banking dynasty, and probably more importantly for us, the owner of the Chateau Lafite vineyard, probably the most famous vineyard in the world. And Rothschild and his son were really responsible for introducing modern winemaking into the Yishuv, the Jewish population of Eretz Yisrael within the Ottoman Empire. And they bought, as well as transplanting some of their own vines, they brought modern processing methods and expertise and finance. And the grape that was principally introduced then was the Carignan grape, which grows in the southwest of France and in Catalonia. So essentially a grape that thrives in sort of dry, hot Mediterranean climate, so that they thought was transferable. And but of course they introduced other wine stocks as well. And here's an early photograph of coopers, people making barrels, specifically wine barrels at Zikron Yaakov in the 1890s. And the wine was exported in these enormous barrels. And the reason I have a question mark about kashrut is that some authorities may not accept today that the wine could be exported into the barrels and then decanted at the point of consumption into bottles. But it's worth observing that the first two prime ministers of Israel, David Ben-Gurion and Levi Eshkol, both for a time worked in the winemaking sector. So it was quite an important early industry in Israel. And here we have an example of a wine label for a bottle of white from 1900. At the bottom right, you can see an early iteration of what became the Carmel label, grape of Canaan. And of course, everything is written in French, both because of the Rothschilds and because wine snobbery demands. And so who was actually drinking this wine? Well, first of all, it was drunk by Jewish communities in the Ottoman Empire. So we're looking at cities like Damascus and Beirut. It was exported down to Egypt, to places like Alexandria and Cairo, to the Russian Empire. Particularly, there was a distribution point in Warsaw. Of course, Poland was then part of the Russian Empire, and to the United States and to Britain and dominions. So it was essentially exported through much of the Jewish world. And here we have an early price list from the early 20th century from London. And I draw your attention to what is at the top, and particularly this coat of arms. We're all very familiar with, by appointment to Her Majesty the Queen, or of course now to His Majesty the King. But this is by special appointment, purveyors to His Royal Highness the Khedive. And the Khedive is the King of Egypt, who's of course a Muslim, so he shouldn't be drinking alcohol. And one can imagine him sort of sitting by the Nile, sort of kicking off his shoes at the end of the day and pouring himself a nice glass of refreshing Palwin. And down below we have a gold medal. That this is an award-winning wine. This is a gold medal at the Vienna Hygiene Expo. And before the meeting, Lee was being a bit cynical about Palwin, but I can tell you that it is not just won a gold medal in Vienna, but it is won a gold medal in Paris, the very capital of wine. This is at the Paris Universal Expo of 1900. Incidentally, that's where the Eiffel Tower was built, and you can just see it in the background of the image. I have no idea how it won a gold medal, whether it was on merit or whether it was the Rothschild influence. But should anybody be whining about it at Seder night, you can say hand on heart that this is an award-winning wine in Paris. So this is a nice piece of ephemera. This is an envelope from the Polish office in Cyrillic. You can just work out, see Warszawa, meaning Warsaw, 1902. Obviously, then Poland was still part of the Russian Empire, which kind of raises the question: how come, if this wine was drunk all over the world, it's now essentially just drunk in Britain? And the reasons are as follows. First of all, of course, the Jews were removed from most of the Islamic world after 1948. And we've also seen that there was a boycott of Jewish businesses. So essentially that market went. With respect to the East European market, of course, the First World War, the Russian Revolution, and the Civil War did not help, because obviously communists are not keen on private enterprise, and they don't like religion. Of course, particularly they don't like our religion, and so that market was essentially lost as well. On the other side of the Atlantic, in the United States, the Manischewitz Mozza company was essentially cleaning up the market. If you think back, of course, that there were serious concerns about food adulteration, and also especially with kosher food, whether it was actually kosher. And so when a brand got a good reputation, it got very large market share. And thus was the case with Manischewitz Mozza. And a very smart entrepreneur went along to them and asked whether he could use their name in producing wine, to which they agreed. And Manischewitz wine then was all-conquering in the American kosher wine market, as it is to this day. And so essentially that leaves Britain and dominions. The advertisement on the left, S. Friedman and Sons, is from Canada. And I draw your attention to the small print here. You will be encouraging Palestinian labor and industries. And again, of course, Palestinian means Jewish. And Friedman is doing the hard sell on the fact that this is not just kosher wine or kosher wine from Eretz Israel, but also you are supporting, for want of a better word, the Zionist movement. And the word Palestine or Palestinian appears about half a dozen times on that single page. On the right, we have the Jewish World, which was a publication here in the UK, and they are advertising Palwin as a handful of Palestine. So essentially the same Zionistic approach to selling it. And who knows, maybe we should be sort of taking it down to one of these protests and trying to flog it to the BDS types. So the big question that everybody always has with Palwin is why the numbers, and everybody gets told a different story, because obviously wines, I think apart from Palwin, I can't think, maybe some whiskies, but wines generally have names, not numbers. And when I was a kid, I asked my father why this was the case. And he told me that this was the numbers of the buses that went past the Palwin office. And of course, I was a small kid, I believed what I was told. And for the record, the offices were first of all in Bevis Marks, the street, not the synagogue, and later in Shoreditch High Street. I understand that the real reason was that the British Jews marketing Palwin were concerned that East European Jews wouldn't be able to order their products if they ordered it by name, and so put numbers instead. I don't know if that's true. It seems quite poor judgment, because obviously people learn languages very quickly. And also, of course, Palwin would have been known to some of these Eastern European immigrants, because they would have drunk it in the Russian Empire. But I've always wondered, well, especially we have Palwin number 10, what about the other numbers? And so I've done a little bit of digging. I haven't been completely successful, but Palwin number 1 was a Sauterne, which is, normally a white wine, but this one was red. They say made from Bordeaux vines. Number 2 was made from Chateau Lafite vines. So these are the the Rothschilds' very own vines. Number 3 was also a Sauternes, but this one was actually allowed to be white. Number 4, I think, is probably known to most people here. It's like a port. It's very quite thick and quite heavy. Number 4A, I suspect people here might remember. It's was this super sweet red liqueur wine. It's no longer produced. Number 5 was compared to a cognac, and number 6 to a muscat. Number 7 a vermouth. Number 8 a sherry. Number 9, I'm afraid I couldn't find anything. Number 10 is probably the best known. Number 11, I do think I remember this. Don't think I've ever drunk it. It's called L'Chaim, which might suggest that you just throw it back, but I know not. Number 12, 13, 14, 15, I'm afraid I couldn't find anything. If anybody knows, please let me know. And number 16 was a cream sherry. And I think what's going on here is that if we think back to perhaps our grandparents and great-grandparents, I mean, certainly my grandparents wouldn't have dreamt of drinking a non-kosher wine, but would want to have the experience. And I think what's going on here is that Palwin or Carmel are trying to copy tastes and flavors of other wines for the kosher market. And of course, as the kosher market contracted, or at least that old-fashioned kosher market contracted, they gradually stopped various lines, and we've basically been left with the wines that people use most for making kiddush. I also came across this drink. I've never heard of it before, and I'd be interested if anyone else has. It's called Kumel, and the internet tells me it's a sweet, colorless, or slightly yellow liqueur flavored with caraway seeds, cumin, and fennel. Kumel has a distinct taste that is often described as a combination of sweet, herbal, and spicy flavors. I had a Hungarian drink called Unicom, and I'm not sure if that's similar. But here, Palwin are making what they call best Russian type Kumel. So it was certainly popular. My understanding is that Kumel was principally made in Latvia and was especially drunk in the Baltic states, so sort of Litvaks and the areas surrounding. Obviously, Palwin don't make it anymore, but you can buy it. And I'm certainly going to buy myself a bottle, because I think genealogy is much more than just gathering names and dates and places. We want to really understand our ancestors. And I think especially for those of us with Litvak ancestors, this is a taste that would have been familiar to them. And so let's try it and connect with our ancestors that way. And so what we've seen essentially is that Palwin lost most of its markets. I mean, of course, Carmel make other more modern brands of wine, but was largely reduced to Britain and Dominions. I suspect that the Canadians, I don't know, I suspect the Canadians started to drink Manischewitz, and of course, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa all drink or produce very good wines themselves. And so I think Palwin, which was once this global brand, is now just reduced to us. Apparently, we drink 100,000 bottles, or at least we buy 100,000 bottles of the stuff every year. And I suspect that most of this is drunk over Pesach. And so I would just say that if you haven't bought yourself a bottle, you should certainly rush out tonight or tomorrow morning. It is part of our history, and if some people don't like it, well, maybe, but I think it's something we need to share with the younger generation. It's a drink. Certainly, I know in my case, it's a drink that my grandparents would have, and I think also my great grandparents. And so let us continue to drink it. And so the second product that I think is identifiably Anglo-Jewish, especially, of course, at this time of year, is Rakusens mozza, especially the red kosher Pesach box. There are, of course, other mozza that have broken into the market, principally Israeli, but I'm afraid I always think that Rakusens is the best. And Jews have been eating mozza for at least 3,500 years, and for most of that time, it's looked like the product on the right, which is to say, round and slightly burnt round the edges. And things only. Let me just show you. Here is an image of somebody making mozza in a traditional way, and in the Anglo-SIG project, somebody, I can't remember, it could be Ali Ergensoy, found a reference in the late 18th century to young members of the community being corralled before Pesach into producing mozza. And I guess that's, again, something that has been happening for literally thousands of years in Jewish communities around the world. And things only started to change in 1838, when Isaac Singer, who's a French Jew, or precisely he was an Alsatian Jew, invented a mozza making machine. And I'm afraid that the two images here are from about 20 years later, but you get the general idea. And of course, in particular, they are cutting mozza out to be round, because the idea of a square mozza hadn't entered anybody's head. Inevitably, there was then a rabbinic argument. I think it didn't actually get going in the argument until the 1850s about whether these mozza making machines were actually kosher or not. Some rabbis, I think Rabbi Brody, was particularly concerned that pieces could get caught in the mechanism, and that might be chametz, and also to do with steam impacting the product. Whereas the other argument is mechanization means the equipment is easier to clean, and therefore everything can be properly kosher. And that was, of course, the argument that won. And that really brings us to the British side of things. And this is really the story of one man, Lloyd Rakusen of Leeds. And he was actually born Lazarus Rakusen here in Bauska in southern Latvia, well, today in southern Latvia, and then the Russian Empire. He was born in 1881. And it's just worth commenting that Latvia, or at least this part of Latvia, is actually just outside the Pale of Settlement, which possibly meant that many of the Jews there were illegal immigrants. And anyway, he was the son of Menashe and Peri Rakusen. And also born in the town was Rabbi Avraham Kook, who later became the leader of religious Zionism in Israel. And I think the community was probably small enough that everybody knew each other. The Cooks obviously went south to Israel, and the Rakusens went west to Britain. And the family, as is quite common, the family arrived in several waves. You know, there's always the first person to come, and then second wave, and so forth. And I think our part of the Rakusen, I'm afraid I haven't been to the National Archives to check, but I think our part of the Rakusen family arrived towards the end of that migration. And Lazarus, let's start calling him Lloyd Rakusen. Like a lot of immigrants, he worked as a jeweler, particularly as a watchmaker. I'm guessing that this is quite an easy business to break into, you probably don't need that much in terms of equipment, and your stock is all very portable. And he was in a workshop in Leeds, here in Bridge Street in Morley in 1900. This photograph of Bridge Street is from 1905, so he would certainly have recognized it. And the company legend is that there was a kitchen out the back, presumably kosher kitchen. And at Passover in 1900, he started making matzot. He soon had 4 people working with him, and sort of the rest is history. The legend is born. But I think it's rather odd that a watchmaker should suddenly be breaking into the matzah business. And I have a possible explanation. This is from the London Gazette of 1897. So this is 3 years before Lloyd Rakusen starts making matzot. And we can see a Passover cake business being dissolved. And 2 of the people in this business are Samuel Rakusen and Hyman Rakusen, who I suspect are Lloyd's brothers, because this would then suggest, and this is pure speculation, that with the closure of this business, there was a big hole in the Leeds matzah market, into which Lloyd, who presumably had helped out these other Rakusens, could easily step, because he essentially knew the business. He would have known the suppliers, he would have known the distributors. So I suspect this is the untold background to the Rakusen story. So anyway, the following year, 1901, this is the census. Lloyd isn't there. I don't know, he's somewhere making matzot or what, but his father was listed as a public baths proprietor, which I rather like. And if you look at little Moses here, he is the first one who is listed as being born in England, and that's in 1895, which therefore means the family must have immigrated before that date. So in 1905, he took his matzah making business to larger premises on the Meanwood Road in Leeds. And the year after that, in 1906, he was in a position to get married. And he married Gertrude Sadowski in Hull. This is the old Western synagogue in Hull. I think it's worth commenting that Hull was one of the ports of entry for Jews to Britain. And so those, for example, coming from where the Rakusens were in Latvia, might originally have just taken a train across Germany, perhaps to somewhere like Bremen and Hamburg, and then taken a ferry from there to Hull. Later, there were options of direct ferries from Riga or Libau, which seems more likely for the Rakusen family. But anyway, he married Gertrude in Hull, and they set up their married life back in Leeds. And 1910 seems to have been the most important year for the company. First of all, they formed a relationship with Joseph Bon in London. Bon was the country's first kosher caterer. So we're just at the point where the Jewish market that would have cared about kashrut, because obviously there were rich Jews previously, sort of Sephardic and German, but that those Jews that had made some money, that wanted everything kosher, now had their own catering firm. This obviously gave Rakusens a foothold in London. And they also formed a relationship with Theodore Carr's company in Carlisle, in Cumbria. People will be familiar with Carr's water biscuits, which of course look and are very like matzot. And I suspect that what was going on was that Rakusens was buying technology from Carr so that he could expand his business like that. So here's the 1911 census, and we can see Lloyd and Gertrude living in Leeds. Lloyd is still listed as a jeweler, which is perhaps a little bit surprising, and his nationality is given as Russian. And I'm actually quite surprised he didn't obtain British citizenship until relatively late, until 1930, which to me seems anyway a bit on the late side. And in 1935, they tried to get planning permission to build a mozza factory in Whitechapel on the site shown. And this makes a lot of sense, of course, because London was the center of the Jewish community, and so and particularly this part of London. And you can just see in the background, you can see the Gherkin. So that was close to the Ashkenazi Great Synagogue and Bevis Marks. And this, of course, was the epicenter of Anglo Jewry. But anyway, their planning permission was rejected. And that is why Mozart, to this day, are made in Leeds rather than in London. So he and Lloyd and Gertrude had 5 children, of whom Philip and Manasseh, later Manuel, followed in their father's footsteps into the business. And here in the 1939 register, we can see that Lloyd has retired. He's passed the baton on to his son. You see, biscuit manufacturer, retired. No such luck for Gertrude, who's still doing unpaid domestic duties, but I suppose that was just a sign of the times. And here in 1944 is a Rakusens advertisement. And I kind of like this because obviously the Second World War is still waging with all those horrors, but here in Britain, we still have a company which is able to guarantee its products are strictly kosher. And of course, we can see London, Leeds, but also there in Manchester, obviously the second largest community in the country. So Lloyd died in 1944. He is buried in Armley Hilltop Cemetery in Leeds. He has a very beautiful gravestone, which says, "In treasured memory of Lloyd Rakusen, the beloved husband of Gertrude, who departed this life August 13, 1944, aged 63 years, deeply mourned by his sorrowing wife, sons, daughter, son-in-law, daughter-in-laws, and grandchildren, ever in our thoughts." And after he died, his picture and his signature, and also a watch, outline of a watch to remind of his former profession, were incorporated by Rakusens into their letterhead. Very, very briefly, because this isn't the corporate history, in 1960, the company still had 300 employees. They bought Joseph Bon in 1973. Obviously, at that point, the kosher market was contracting, and therefore they were consolidating. And they were sold, actually, along with cars, to United Biscuits in 1978, and then returned to private ownership a few years later in '83. And during the 1980s, they were then trying to expand their product range. And of course, people here might remember the egg noodles and Rakusen's Italian-style spaghetti. I'm not quite sure what other style spaghetti there might be. Vermicelli, macaroni, Rakusen's cooking oil, I certainly remember. And I think actually I remember this cookbook as well. And here is a very 80s, 1980s recipe: macaroni with paprika mushroom sauce, which I think looks rather nice, but very much of the time. And obviously they were trying to develop their business. And here we have an image of one of their production lines. They used to have 5. They now have 3 production lines, of which one is dedicated to Passover production, presumably so it can be more closely monitored. And their website tells us, when making our famous matzahs, we source only the finest farm flour. I'm not quite sure where else they get flour, and the purest Yorkshire water to create the dough, then flame bake it for precisely 18 minutes to ensure the perfect balance of taste and crispness. And actually, I thought the mozza last year wasn't very good, but that was the exception. Perhaps it proves the rule. So the company was bought in 2015 by Andrew Simpson, who is pictured here. And he also is trying to expand into new markets. And I think we're talking about sort of vegetarians and vegans, but also into Asia. And so who knows, maybe in a few years' time, 1.1 billion Chinese people will all be nibbling like us on their matzah. And so really, I'm afraid that that's quite a quick canter through the story of these 2 brands. As I said before, I think they are intrinsic to who we are as British Jews. We recognize these instantly, whereas non-Jews and of course Jews from other countries don't. And I think they're part of our family stories. And so certainly for me, these will be on my table on Seder night. So other than wishing everybody Chag Pesach Sameach, if anybody has any questions or comments, I can hand over to Lee.
Thank you, David. And before we get to those questions, I'd just like to call for a huge round of applause for entertaining us. Thank you. So if anyone does have a question, do feel free to raise your little electronic hand or your physical hand, and I will come to you. I think I see Leslie's hand up. Do you want to start us off, Leslie?
Can you hear me? I've had problems with this before. I don't think you can hear me.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. First of all, 2 very quick observations. One, you took me way back with this mention of Kummel, because that was a great family drink of ours. And we either called it Kimmel or Kummel. It was absolutely lovely, and I wish I had some right this minute. The thing about it was that because it has caraway seeds, the pretense was that it aided digestion. So you had it at the end of the meal with a little tiny glassful, but it really was lovely. The other quick observation was that the unpaid domestic duties you see a lot, it just means housewife, because the term housewife wasn't used. But now I have a question. My uncle in the 1970s was an agent for kosher wines, and he also visited old people's homes, and he published a little magazine of stories of Jewish life from when he was younger. And occasionally there are adverts in there, which presumably funded the printing of it. And one of them was for Camel brand and Ashkelon wines, Israeli wines of the highest quality. Look for the camel on the label. And I remember kosher wines with a camel on the label. Do you know anything about Camel brand wines?
I'm afraid I don't. I'm actually the child of 2 total wine snobs. So the only kosher wine ever allowed through our door was Palwins for Kiddush and for Pesach. So I'm afraid not. Maybe somebody else can help.
It was shipped under the supervision of the Joint Israeli Rabbinate, and it was available from Frank Twining, 53A Cowley Road, with a telephone number in Oxford. It was actually the Israeli wine, but I do remember we had that, and we had Palwins both. Oh, they both really, but there you go.
Thank you.
But if anybody else knows anything about it, I'd love to know about camel wines.
All right. Thank you, Leslie. Should we go to Rebecca? If I could ask you to unmute.
Two things really. Firstly, about the wine. One of my best friends, she absolutely loves Palwins. Absolutely. So when anybody used to come around for dinner, we'd all drink like white wine or whatever, and she would always request a little bit of the kosher Palwins wine. So that's
No accounting for taste.
awesome. Okay, so my sister said, look up on our family tree before the meeting, and lo and behold, Louise and I are related to Moses Montague Rakusen, who was born in 1909, and he's buried in Leeds. Our family do come from, I think it's on my paternal grandmother's side, and they come from Bauska in Latvia. So I presume that is the connection with the Rakusen family, and both my parents come from, my dad came from Middlesbrough, but his mother came from Leeds, and my mum's family, our great-grandparents came from Leeds as well.
So mozza is in your blood.
It looks like it.
Very good. Okay. Thanks for that, Rebecca. Let's go to Bernard, and then we'll come back to Leslie. Bernard?
I just wanted to thank you for what was a really entertaining talk, and to say that as someone who doesn't drink alcohol of any sort, I largely attribute it to having been forced to drink Palwins as a child, either at shul or at Pesach. I think that may be a slight exaggeration. So I wasn't quite sure what I expected to get from this, but I wanted to share with you that having lived for 14 years in Canada and having been to Seders and to services where Manischewitz is served, although I didn't drink it, the discussion around the Manischewitz that was at least served in the shuls or at the Seder tables made it sound as if it was very closely related to the Palwins that people enjoy in this country. On the other bit of the presentation, I'm not allowed the main ingredient of matzah. So when it comes to Pesach, there is very little that I can do except have something that will never be compliant with the rules. And I'm fascinated by it. So while you were talking, I was looking up Rakusens and Manischewitz and Yehuda and some of the other manufacturers of matzah to see what they offer for people like me. And although they all make things that claim to be gluten-free, in fact, none of them make anything that is approved for Pesach consumption. And if you look at the Rakusens gluten-free matzah, it has 12 ingredients. Its regular matzah has 2, wheat and water. So it's hardly surprising that it can't be made to comply. So I didn't expect to get a lot out of this presentation, but I have been A, entertained, and B, made to go and look at other connections, for which I thank you. I haven't yet, unlike Rebecca, looked to see whether I'm related to either Rakusens, and I think now I understand there isn't a Mr. Palwin, so I know that I'm not related to him, but thanks.
Thank you. I think actually there is a gluten-free matzah. I seem to remember that my rabbi's wife, who is American, had some sort of product, a second Seder a few years ago. So maybe if you look
about a decade ago, it was announced with a great fanfare that there was a gluten-free matzah being grown from gluten-free wheat in Scotland, and that had been approved for Pesach. And I searched and found one shop in London that was selling it, which was on, I think, it was either West End Lane or Abbey Road. It's somewhere around where it changes its name. And I went there and they wanted £35 for one box. And I decided that I would continue without matzah, or at least without approved matzah for Pesach. And I've never bothered to check whether it's still out there extorting the needy.
Yeah, I actually, something I should have said is that one of the side effects of matzah making machines is matzah became considerably cheaper because obviously it was very heavily manually, a lot of physical labor in before. And obviously most Jews at that point were very poor. So it did have that social advantage, and of course, Bernard, you would know that in the certainly in the earlier Spanish and Portuguese community in London, they were actually giving out matzah to poorer members of the community, such families such as.
They were giving it to the richer members as well, as far as I can count, and on a much larger scale. But we'll come to that when I give my next talk.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernard. I noticed that Sue Wolfe is holding up a box of gluten-free matzah. I can't quite see who makes them. Can you move it down slightly?
It's Yehuda, and I know them. And unfortunately, it contains egg, and I'm not allowed egg.
Okay.
But thank you, Sue. I do know them, and I would love to be eating them, but I can't.
Yeah.
And they're not approved for Pesach.
Stacey, I know you're cooking, but you get gluten-free matzahs every year. Do yours have egg in or not? Thumbs up for egg. You're on mute. And there we go.
Honestly, I'm not sure if there's egg in them.
Okay. All right. And are yours from Yehuda?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Aviv makes it. The Israeli brands make them gluten-free.
Okay.
I think egg is more Sephardic, except of course good Anglo-Sephardim such as myself always basically do the same as the Ashkenazim. So.
Okay. Just before we go to Peter, I think I saw Leslie hand flick up. Did you want to ask a second thing?
I did. David, you gave some really lovely quotes about people's versions about kosher wine, especially the Disraeli one, which I should probably pinch and use. Do you ever watch the program Crazier, the American program?
Absolutely, yes. I did try to see if I could put that clip in. Yes, that's exactly right. For those who didn't see it, what Leslie is referencing is that Fraser has a Jewish girlfriend, and they're trying to pretend to the mother that he is Jewish, and they offer her some wine, and they want her to think it's kosher wine. So basically, they pour half a bucket of sugar into this wine and desperately sort of stirring it. So yes, it's exactly right. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Leslie. Let's go to Peter. If you could unmute. Okay.
Yes, hi. Fascinating talk. I really, you must have done a fair amount of research, certainly for the pictures. Anyway, I grew up in a secular home, and we would have had matzah all year round, I mean, from time to time. And the two things I remember most about it, one, it would make a terrible mess as you broke up the very large pieces of matzah. But my father had a habit that he would have some hot black coffee, and he would put matzah in the coffee and let it soak into it, and then with a spoon pull out and eat the matzah. Whether that was because he had virtually no teeth, or whether it was a particular habit of secular Jews, I have no idea. But anyway, that's my memory of matzah. The other thing, just to point, Kümmel is is popular in Germany. It is a DGSD like Jägermeister, and it is, as you say, made with cumin and and caraway seed and a few other things. So there must have been the reason Palwin would have done it perhaps was because of a German type of background, that somebody thought, well, if this is popular there, then maybe we should do it. Whether it's kosher, certainly in Germany it wouldn't have been kosher, but there you are. That's Kumul.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. If I could ask a quick historical question, David. I was just looking at the timing of all this, and seems to be, you know, the 1880s and forward. I was just wondering what the Sephardim in England before the Ashkenazi influx did for their Pesach wine and Pesach matzah. Did they make their own, or were there other manufacturers? Or...
Certainly the matzot, as Bernard will cover in his talk, was made. I'm assuming just within the whole courtyard area of Bevis Marks. Wine. I mean, the truth is, of course, that Sephardim were quite involved in the wine trade, and we had congregations in the Loire, in sort of Bordeaux and Bayonne, also community in Livorno in Italy, and probably they're also making wine in Morocco. So I would guess they were fairly well catered for. I would guess. I don't know.
Okay, and my father used to have a wine cabinet, and my mother hasn't touched it since his death, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have some of the missing Palwin numbers in there. So I'll have a look when I go down for the first night Seder, all right?
Oh, and number 15 is the prize.
Thank you, David. Okay, any other questions? Don't see any hands, so in which case I'm going to ask for another round of applause for David for answering all our questions, and again for our talk. Thank you, David. Okay, so as the new Anglo-SIG boss, it's your call as to what we do next. Were you planning to do a sort of a general workshop, or did you need to go off and start cooking your Pesach meals?
No, actually, we're mostly under control. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I assume it's just sort of a general Q&A after the break. Is that not how you like
yeah, we can certainly do that. I just want to make sure that you're willing to. So why don't we have a short 15-minute break then, and we'll come back at 3:15 UK time. For those of you who have any general Anglo questions, I know David is definitely an expert. Gina's around, Sue Wolf, Catherine as well, so lots of experienced. Oh, Andrew Millard, lots of experienced people, so they'll be able to answer any more general questions and not just about matzot and Palwins. So okay, everyone, see you back at 3:15. Thanks, everyone.